Even as we ask that question, it almost invites you to kind of put up barriers and walls in a way that I'm not sure that's how Jesus would frame that question, but that's kind of how it comes across in our culture. Well, hey folks, how's it going out there? Pastor Jon Brewer here is your host and co-host today, Jeana Linhart.
Hello.
We're so glad that you're tuning in to episode 2, and we're excited to talk about immigration today. A loaded topic for our culture and, very polarizing too, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be hopefully we can bring down the temperature a little bit, but also have some meaningful discussion and really look at what does the Bible say?
Yeah.
Like maybe there's some hangups that our culture has that maybe we as Christians don't really need to have.
Yeah, it's true. And I think just having discussion is what's needed because so much has just been opinions thrown at us without time for listening and considering.
Yeah, that's right. So speaking of listening, I wanted to start out setting the tone today with God's Word. So this might be a familiar passage for you from Luke chapter 10. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Here we go. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" A relevant question for our topic today. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. And they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Okay. Well, Jeana, what are your initial impressions about that passage as it relates to our topic today?
Yeah, at first, just that the person who is being neighborly is not who you expect them to be.
Mm-hmm.
The man is overlooked by people who are like him, his own countrymen, and the people whose job it is to care for others.
Right. Yeah. It's Jesus obviously intentionally chooses someone we wouldn't expect, and I think that's part of the point, right? That it's not about just helping those that are like us or of our group or the insiders. Jesus is a lot more concerned with us being neighborly to whoever comes across our path rather than fixating on a particular demographic or proximity to where we live.
Yeah.
But I also love that he demonstrates that he cares for his neighbor with his own personal expense.
Yeah.
And so it's sacrificial in nature, and that the posture of a Christian is that we are giving our lives away for the sake of living like Christ, following his example. And as the passage closed, I think the way that I would frame the conclusion there is that I think we're called to err on the side of mercy.
Absolutely.
Rather than what do I owe this person, or what should they expect, or those kinds of questions. So I thought that was just a kind of a good tone for us to start out the conversation today, because it is such a heated topic, and I think for me, anyways, that kind of lets a lot of the air out of the balloon. Like, oh yeah, this is who we are,
Right.
and so we can dive in from there. What's our first question today?
Yeah. So our first question is, does a nation have the right to limit or control who is allowed to enter their borders?
Yeah. Even as we ask that question, it almost invites you to kind of put up barriers and walls in a way that I'm not sure that's how Jesus would frame that question, but that's kind of how it comes across in our culture. But to answer the question, I think, to be frank, I think the principle of the matter is yes, that governments exist to uphold the rule of law. And part of the way that they do that is by, to some degree, securing borders. And so that function allows government to some degree, control the amount of illegal behavior or harmful behavior that might happen to its citizens from outside coming in. And to allow for the flourishing of its people, right? When you think about the development of society over time, it's not always been that way, though, right? That we've had secure borders that have patrolmen and women that are guarding people from coming in. It's not always been that way. And, when you look at the Old Testament, for example, we see very permeable borders. Right. And so I think sometimes we get caught up thinking that the way we talk about borders today is the way that people have always thought about it. And I think it's important to remember we're at this little sliver in history.
Right.
Doesn't mean that I'm not trying to say we're right or wrong in the way that we are having some of these discussions today necessarily, but I think it's important to look at it in the scope of all of history. So governments do exist to uphold the rule of law. Part of that has to do with borders and how we manage those. Yeah. Going back to Scripture, Romans 13, verse 4, reminds us, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So again, we're just reinforcing this idea that government is there to protect its citizens, to provide for the flourishing of the people within its borders. And whether threats come from outside or inside, government is there to manage that and to bring about justice so that flourishing is allowed to continue.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is a principle and kind of an ideal, because not every government, including our own, has ever done this perfectly.
Absolutely.
And sometimes not even well.
Yeah.
So yes, government principally has the right.
Yeah. But it can be abused,
It can
be misused, or it can be neglected. Yeah, there's lots of ways it could go wrong because we're fallen people, even people in authority, right? So at the same time, we also have to say that sometimes people who are not native born to a given country sometimes do intend to bring some sort of threat or harm to a given nation that they're trying to enter. And so there is, again, according to this principle, there's a responsibility of the government to provide for the safety of the people within its borders from either external or internal threats. And to provide for the flourishing. So that also is to say, when we think about flourishing and the things that allow a society to flourish, we live in a finite world. Resources are limited. And so I think it's valid to at least consider, what kind of housing is available, how many jobs are available, how much resources is available to a given nation. And in order for a nation to flourish, it has to some degree, figure out how do we to the best of our ability, make sure that people have access to their resources that they need to live a good life.
Yeah.
Right. So, that's a perfectly valid conversation and value that a nation and government should have and pursue for their people. Right.
Yeah. And that can look different for different countries at different times in history.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that ties into entry of the foreigner or the immigrant. It ties to denying citizenship as we think about how to manage those resources, right? We're just talking about at the principle level right now, right? So at the same time, we want to also make the case, or at least give biblical precedent for allowing foreigners or immigrants to live among a native people of a given nation. So a series of passages that I wanted to share. Exodus 23, verse 12 says, 6 days do your work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. So God says, even in the Torah, all the way back to the Torah, that he is acknowledging the presence of the foreigner. He's providing for the flourishing of the foreigner by giving them rest, just like the Hebrew would be. Numbers 15:14. For the generations to come, whenever a foreigner or anyone else living among you presents a food offering as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, they must do exactly as you do. Right? I love that God is acknowledging, again, very early on in the nation of Israel, that, again, presuming foreigners residing among them. I love that God is also anticipating the foreigner becoming a worshiper of Yahweh, and that they have capacity to give a pleasing gift to the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a beautiful picture, and it tells us a lot about the character and nature of our God, that he cares about these things. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, it seems like we're talking about a biblical precedent for allowing foreigners, but it seems like God has set up an invitation for foreigners, an encouragement even to bring them in, to meet his plan of wanting to enfold all people.
And of course, we'll see that manifest more and more as we get closer and closer to Jesus' coming, right? Deuteronomy 16:11, one more example. And rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites in your towns, and the foreigners, and the fatherless, and the widows living among you. Okay? So we're just seeing a consistent pattern through Scripture of God providing and valuing the foreigner as they're grafted into God's family. We see that, of course, in the specific people of Rahab.
Yep.
Rahab, if you recall, was in Jericho, welcomed the spies, the Israelite spies who came to see the land that God had promised to them, and God spares her and her family, and they're grafted into the family of God. We see that with Ruth, the Moabite, who is also grafted in and becomes the grandmother of David.
Yeah.
So lots of examples of God just inviting, bringing people into his family. And it culminates, we're just going to fast forward the tape a little bit, all the way to Revelation, where we see the New Jerusalem, and it describes how the gates are open wide.
Yeah.
And I love that picture, right, of just, of course, it's a picture of peace, right? There are no more external threats or internal threats, but also that there's this idyllic picture of what God intends, what God is moving us towards, which is that there is no longer to be a foreigner. That category goes away,
Yeah.
and that we are one people.
We're all citizens.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we got to remember, that is the ideal. That's what we're moving towards. At the same time, we still live in a fallen world.
Yep.
And so we have to have a kind of a nuanced approach to this conversation, because while God's moving us to a place where those gates are open eternally and always, that's not wise or appropriate in our current day and age, where there are still threats in the world. And so, it would be, I think it's right to say it would be negligent for a government to not give attention to how to justly address internal and external threats. If they didn't do that, they wouldn't be doing their job. And so it's appropriate that we're having this conversation and not just throwing the doors open wide to anybody.
Right. Yeah, I think we see how borders on any level bring clarity to relationships. So we know that with the fences between our house and our neighbor's house.
Right.
And we know that the borders of our city and the borders of our state and the borders of our country. Mm-hmm. So each of those has limits around them. And yet it seems that God intends for his people to be able to cross borders. We have missionaries, and we have people going into other lands in order to spread the gospel, and we're inviting others who are coming to us to integrate into the kingdom that God is building.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so borders are good. They help bring they help prevent conflict, right? Because when you know what your boundary is and I know what my boundary is, that's where we can have a measure of peaceful coexistence, and then we know how to relate to each other properly. So from that, I think we've set the table well. So I think a better question than what a lot of our society is asking around, do we have the rights to limit or control, or, should we have absolutely closed borders, these kinds of things. I think a better question, a more practical question, is how should we think about, first of all, foreigners and immigrants? And then we'll get to this later, like, what do we do when we find foreigners or immigrants living among us? So having more of a presuming that we're to do life with the foreigner, the immigrant, and then what should that look like? Right.
Yeah. Can we just quickly define some terms?
Sure.
So when I hear foreigner, I'm thinking anyone who wasn't born in the country that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that could be a visitor, an exchange student, an ambassador. And then immigrants are people who are intending to move to the country permanently.
Right.
And a lot of the discussion that's happening right now in the news and on social media is about illegal immigration or undocumented people.
Right.
And so just wanting to make sure that when we're saying foreigner, that we're not keeping it so broad, but we are trying to narrow down to the issue that seems to be prevalent.
Yeah, we don't use foreigner so much in our culture today, and when we do use it, we usually use it as a way of holding people at arm's length, that these are foreign to me or to my people. That's not the way that the Bible uses that word. And so we're trying to really hearken back to biblical language, but also bringing it into the into the present here.
Yeah.
So I think the place to start, now that we've defined some terms, is I think we have to say first, we don't want to assume anybody is a foreigner or an immigrant. It's just not a helpful place to start, especially in our increasingly globalized society, especially in the U.S. We're very, love the word melting pot. I heard somebody recently say we're more like a salad. It's not like we're all just blending together and no longer indistinguishable, but God's creating this big salad, and all these flavors are coming together to enrich what God's doing among us. But anyway, the idea is, with an increasingly globalized society, things like skin color, somebody's first language, or whether or not they have a strong accent,
How they dress,
what their religion might be, these are not reliable indicators of someone's citizenship or lack thereof. And so when we use those things to help us make sense of whether somebody is an insider or outsider, that's called profiling, and that's actually inappropriate.
Right.
Yeah.
I would even say, once it has become clear, like maybe someone says, I am immigrating to the United States, that doesn't mean that they are a threat.
Right.
Or are just, they automatically are causing harm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Foreigner
absolutely.
does not equal bad.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, God makes clear to tell us over and over again, remember, you were exiles and foreigners. You are exiles and foreigners in this world presently. They were literally those things. When we look at Assyria and Babylon being carried into exile, we see that literally as their slaves in Egypt. But that metaphor continues into the New Testament as God reminds us that this is not our home, that we've got another home and we're living in a foreign land. And yes, we might have legal citizenship, but when we talk about where our allegiance is to, it's first and foremost to the kingdom of God. That we should have empathy and be able to relate to other people with some compassion and understanding that we're in some similar shoes here.
Yeah.
Right? Ephesians 2 says it this way, verse 11, therefore remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. And skipping ahead to verse 19, it says, goes on to say, consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household. And so I think that's an important foundation for us in the way that we live in our fallen world, that God's intention for humanity is not to continue to hold us at arm's length, but to continue to draw us near, that we might all be adopted into his family and become one people.
It seems like his plan is that whether we are the foreigner or we have foreigners near us, that the goal is always to create community. And I just think about in Jeremiah, the people are in exile, and God tells them, build houses, plant gardens, get married, get your kids married. It is going to be a long time that you're going to be neighbors with these people. So being careful that we're not falling into idolatry and how other people are worshiping, but people and relationships and building that community is part of how God's building his kingdom. So wherever you are in the world, or whoever in the world is coming to you, get together, make a community.
Yeah, and I think I can almost hear the argument or the skeptic from across the internet saying, well, isn't that really more of a principle for Christians to live out with other people coming into the church community? Like we should be bringing people into the church who are worshipers of God and of Christ. And I would say yes, and I think that's the way that we're intended to live in the world too. That, when those Old Testament passages that we read about precedent for God drawing or inviting the foreigner, there's nothing in there about mandating that they worship Yahweh in order for them to live among the Israelites. And so again, those are just passages about precedent. They're not prescriptive for us in terms of we have to live the way that the Old Testament Hebrew people did in their whole legal code. That's not what I'm suggesting, but I'm talking about how those things demonstrate the nature and character of our God and the things that he values that we ought to value also.
Yeah, and we don't want earthly governments dictating how or who we worship, because God doesn't want people forced into worshiping him. He wants it to be our choice to.
Not that they could. Forced worship isn't worship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't work anyway.
Yeah.
But since we are talking about being Christians, then we want community in the world and to be drawing people into the church and into the kingdom.
Yeah, and we live out our values within the church and within the broader community.
That's how we can be in the world and not of the world.
That's just called integrity. We want to be the same people in the church as we are outside the church, and this is part of how we live out our citizenship in heaven.
Right. So as Christians, what do we do when we find immigrants and even undocumented immigrants living among us?
Okay, first, maybe this should have been the first thing that we said, but we have to remember that every person is made in the image of God and worthy of dignity.
Yeah.
Right, just full stop. So no matter whether we come across somebody who's engaged in illegal activity, or again, just encountering somebody who's feels utterly different from us, that person is now and always worthy of dignity and respect. And so, going back to Leviticus 19, God says, when a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. This is the heart of our God, that no matter who it is, this is a person that he's designed, that he's created, he's put on the earth, and that because they bear that image of God, that they deserve to be treated with a certain level of care and compassion. I love that passage also harkens back again. He says, you were foreigners in Egypt, right? And so again, he's reminding us of our own story, and that should remind us and compel us to have empathy, because this is where we're coming from too, in a certain way.
Yeah, so seeing them as image bearers first.
Yeah,
about
absolutely. So from there, I'd go to Romans 12, which says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Not with some, but with everyone. And that word peace, we've talked about this before. That word peace is not, we don't use it the same way that the culture uses it. It's not just a lack of conflict or just a measure of quiet. But it's actually it's from the root word in Hebrew of shalom, which is this kind of picture of holistic harmony, union, well-being, and health at all levels. So I'm talking about peace within myself, peace with God, peace with my neighbor, peace with our church, peace within the broader community at all levels, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of those things. That's what shalom is, and that's what we're to be about building with the help of the Holy Spirit in our community, living at peace with everyone, as far as it depends on us. Not everybody's going to cooperate with that.
Yeah. It seems like it also encompasses thriving, that it's more than that it's active.
Yeah.
That it's, like you said, it's lack of conflict, but it also is active generosity, active community, active compassion.
Yep.
And so it's things working the way they are supposed to.
Yeah. Well, and because we're still in a fallen world, things don't always go as they're supposed to. And so it implies forgiveness and reconciliation where possible.
Yeah.
So not just allowing things that are going wrong to continue in that direction, but to, as far as it depends on us, try to bring the love of Christ into that situation, that we might work towards flourishing. So almost don't want to say this because it's so reductionistic, but I think at the very least we have to say that means do no harm, especially when we're talking about immigration. Like, to what degree is the way that we're treating undocumented people or people we think are undocumented, how much of is just we're not even following the basic standard of not doing harm rather than the high standard of seeking shalom with people, no matter where they're from or whether or not we see the world the same way or whatever it might be.
So at the very least, do no harm.
Right.
But really seeking their good.
Seeking their good.
And that reminds me too of that Jeremiah passage when he's saying, if you're seeking the good of the land that you're in, it's going to be good for you too.
If they prosper, you will prosper too.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Again, I know some of the anticipated questions that I can almost hear it out loud is like, but what if they are breaking the law? Shouldn't somebody say something? And I think this is where it gets a little bit, a little more challenging, and we got to be careful and nuanced about this. But here's where I would start. Unless you have some sort of evidence for criminal activity, we're being presumptuous. And so rather than assuming ill intent or illegal activity, let's just kind of pump the brakes and just ask yourself, and maybe even prayerfully discern with the Lord, like, God, do I have any actionable evidence that they are intending ill will for me, for our community? They're in some way tangibly impacting the flourishing of our community.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any evidence for that, then maybe you're in the wrong. And maybe you actually need to confess to the Lord about your mindset towards some of the people that he's bringing your way, and that maybe he's inviting you to repent, a change of mind in terms of the way you think about this person and the way that you interact with them. So remember, laws exist to allow for the flourishing of a nation's citizens, and for those who are living among them, right? So unless they are engaged in criminal activity, they are probably not inhibiting your flourishing, right?
Yeah. It seems like a lot of the opinions that get thrown out about this issue of undocumented immigrants or undocumented people is that they're automatically breaking the law just by existing, and they get called names. They get called illegal, which seems really unfair because it's not illegal to not be a citizen. We have non-citizens all the time with people on vacation, students, things like that. So can we do some more term defining? Because someone has come here, even maybe with the intent to move, it's not the same criminal activity as like trafficking people or trafficking drugs.
Exactly.
That's very different.
Yeah, we need to make some clear distinction here about the kinds of things that inhibit flourishing and the kinds of things that have some significance and weight to them, but maybe are not inhibiting flourishing. And we have some rules and parameters that are important for a society to have organization and to have good record keeping. I'm thinking of things like expired tabs.
Right.
Like, is that really a criminal offense? Well, it's okay. It is. There is a law about it, and yet is my not having tabs that are up to date really inhibiting the flourishing of my neighbor?
Right.
It's a totally different category.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And knowing that there's tons of nuance in our government's process for citizenship, it can take years and years. And so while someone is in process, they are not yet a citizen, but do we just automatically call them illegal?
Yeah. And I have a little bit of a beef just with that term. Of you sometimes hear people call undocumented folks or people that are still in the process of citizenship or whatever, or they truly are here illegally. You sometimes hear people call them illegals. And I just think that sends totally the wrong message.
Yeah.
People are not illegal. People are not illegal. They might do illegal activity, but they themselves are not an illegal person. And so I think there's a problem when we're using that term as a noun rather than as an adjective to describe behavior.
Right.
And so I think if we can avoid that term, I think we're in better company, because we want to, again, affirm dignity and value of this person rather than making them think or feel like they're lacking value or worth because they might be here under conditions that we don't look favorably upon.
Right. And remembering that citizens do illegal things too.
100%.
It is not about people's criminal actions are not necessarily about whether they're a citizen or not. Yeah.
Okay, this is a little bit weightier. We're just kind of going a little bit deeper and deeper into the water here. What's our next question, Jeana?
Should foreigners who are engaged in criminal activity be deported?
Yeah. Okay, it is an important question, and no topic off limits here, so we got to go there. It is the legal right of the nation, of any nation, to deport undocumented residents. Again, we've already covered the bases, right? That a nation is there for the flourishing of its citizens. Part of that includes borders and boundaries, and that in order to provide for the flourishing of the community, that sometimes they need to protect its citizens either from threats internal or external, right? And so sometimes what that means is external threats are physically removed. And we see that in all kinds of places in society, right? So it's not unique to this kind of scenario. Although we also have to throw in the caveat that although the government can do that, it's not under obligation to do that. And so there might be other appropriate ways to handle what would be considered that threat, right? And I am, and that's what we mean by criminal activity, right? That it poses some kind of threat to the flourishing of society, right? Not just expired tabs, that kind of thing necessarily.
Yeah, but it seems like there has to be that combination of undocumented and criminal activity. Should a nation deport someone who's simply undocumented if they are not harming the society?
Well, again, it depends if they're in that citizenship process or not. And again, we're just talking about what the nation has the right to do, not what they should do. So do they have the right to remove people who are not in the process of citizenship or that are full citizens? And again, they have the right to do so, but whether or not they should is a totally different question. Again, we live in a fallen world, and I don't think that we can rightly expect the governments of the world to always embody the values that we as Christians have. And so while I, as Jon, as an individual, am going to be more inclusive and inviting and maybe want to have those borders more permeable in some ways, I can fully appreciate and respect that my government might see it a little bit differently. And I don't feel like I have to be fully aligned with a secular government on all of those things. Although I want my government to embody more of the values that I have, of course. So, I think I want to say it's perfectly valid for exceptions to be made. I think it's reasonable for exceptions to be made for illegal activity, people engaged in illegal activity that is not an acute threat to society, like expired tabs, for example. No person who has moved here by illegal means or is born to an undocumented resident should expect to be safe from deportation. Now, I know that there's probably going to be some Christians who differ with me on this, but again, we're talking about what does the nation have the right to do as people who guard the borders and are protecting for the flourishing of their people. They have the right to deport. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what I want to do, but I think they have the right to do that. So, this is the challenge of, the Bible talks often about how the decisions and choices and shortcomings of previous generations impact future generations. Mm-hmm. And so it can be really challenging for us to look at someone who was born here, whose parents came here illegally, and yet they were born here. They didn't have any choice in the matter. And yet their parents created a scenario where their children have to live in a very precarious scenario where they are under threat. No fault of their own, because of the choices that their parents made. And that's not unique to the topic of immigration. We see that in lots of different places in society. Again, we need to clarify here. Even if that's the case, they always retain the right to be treated with dignity. Mm-hmm. So, to treat people who are being deported as if they're scum, as if they are guilty of criminal activity that's impeding the flourishing of our society, totally inappropriate. Mm-hmm. Right? That these are people that we're called to love,
yes,
even as we have boundaries with them.
Right. One thing that I greatly appreciate about our government is that we do offer rights to non-citizens,
sure,
especially the right to due process. And I think that's where some of the tension comes up, because it definitely can seem like undocumented people are not being given that right, mm-hmm, and just being shipped off without that due process. And so that's where, even though, like you said in Romans 13, yes, governments have the right, mm-hmm, I think we have a Christian responsibility to call out the government when they're not following, sure, their own rules.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and on that same note, if we're going to call deportations an act of the judicial system, mm-hmm, then they should be just actions.
Yes.
So consequences should always be commensurate with the crime, mm-hmm, right? Otherwise, it's injustice.
Right.
And so, this is where I think a lot of Christians are really challenged by some of the things we're seeing in the media, is some of the deportations or the processing leading up to deportation doesn't look very just.
No.
And so, this is an area of great discernment for the Christian, because, I think in our day and age, we're all a little bit more cautious about what we're seeing on the media, and mm-hmm, how much of it is portraying the truth, and right, how much of it is hype and trying to get views and these kinds of things. But I think we do have some level of obligation to do our homework, to try to get to primary sources when we, yes, can, and take action on the most credible evidence that's available to us. And I think that also goes for taking action in regards to the situations that are maybe a little bit closer to home, mm-hmm, like literally geographically closer to home. Are these people in our community? And how are we caring for the people that live right around us?
Yeah.
I think it can be overwhelming to think about, taking on
the whole country
or the whole,
yes,
world. I don't know that we were ever intended to think about how to live out our faith at such a large scale, except for leaders who are in those places of government positions. But we are called to figure out, how do I live today in the place that God has planted me? So here's a caveat to the question, or a nuance to that same question. Is it the government's duty to deport them to their country of origin? Because we're seeing that more and more too, right, in the news, that people are being deported to nations that they've never even been to before. And that, I think, that rightly draws some concern. And is this appropriate? And how should we think about this?
Yeah.
So I just would say, as a Christian, I don't see any biblical argument for this being necessary in terms of there being a restriction on that happening. And I think in some ways it's logical in this way, that it seems like a valid part of the risk of undocumented or illegal entry, that, if you know that there's a possibility I'm going to be deported, and I might not even be deported to my home, how much more of a deterrent is that to make that illegal entry?
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to say definitively that it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I can see the value of that deterrent for nations protecting for its flourishing. I have to say I'm very open to changing my mind about this. On the one hand, when we will always want to treat people with dignity, and because they're in the image of God, and so if it's me and I'm being deported, please send me back to my country of origin. That's what I would want for myself. And so on the one hand, treat others the way you want to be treated, right? And so if I'm being deported as a consequence of my illegal entry, that's what I would want for myself. So maybe that's a better case, is that they do go back to their country of origin. I'm just saying I think there's a case to be made either way.
Yeah, I think it's so not black and white, though, because I think about refugees who they're maybe coming in illegally because it is too dangerous to stay in their country of origin. And to go back or to be sent back would be certain death.
Yeah.
And so it might be worth the risk.
It might be worth the risk. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I guess where I would end the note on that question is, regardless if they go to their country of origin or somewhere else, I think we do bear responsibility as the one doing the deporting, to seek some level of assurance about the level of dignity and living conditions in which they're going to.
Yeah. And it seems like if someone's being deported because they have had criminal activity, we would hope that their country of origin would also seek justice in whatever trial they need to have there. If it is just trying to make a better life, sorry, you need to go back and do it the right way, then that would be we're sending you back. But
yeah, that's where the nuance comes in.
We're not putting punishment on you for no crime.
Yep. The consequence should be commensurate with the crime, or and maybe crime's not even the right word per se. It is a legal activity, but it's not necessarily harming or impeding the flourishing of the society. So I'm just trying to make that distinction that, yes, those engaged in harmful criminal activity, certainly there's a reason for them to be treated differently than those who are not in that same category. Yeah. Okay, question 4.
How should agents of the law behave when enforcing customs and immigration?
Okay, big one. I feel like I say that with every question, but here we are. So we've been saying this, I think, over and over through this podcast episode, but there's a difference between how Christians should behave in what is reasonable for a secular government in a fallen world, right? I think we can all understand that we can't always have the same standards for non-Christ followers as we do for ourselves. That being said, I think that God's law is written on our hearts. And so there are certain ways in which, Christian or not, that there are certain standards that we should hold people up to, Christian or not. So, for example, should agents of the law be masked? I have a really big problem with that. If we're really enacting justice, then why are we hiding?
Yeah.
And I understand the rationale. I've heard the rationale. We're trying to protect from retaliation, those kinds of things. I think that's always the danger of enforcing the law, is that there might be some retaliation. But what is it about the way that we're enforcing our immigration processes that these officers in particular feel the need to be masked? I think that should give us reason for pause and for examination about how we're going about these things. It's funny, though. At the same time, I also want to say, is it implicitly wrong to ever wear a mask? I mean, no. Technically, no. But I do. But like I said, I think it's a valuable thing to just take witness of, that, are we lacking in conviction that we're behaving appropriately in the sense that I need to hide my identity?
And on the flip side is anonymity giving permission to be more unjust?
Absolutely.
In the same way that, a computer troll might say something online that they would never say in person, is wearing the mask letting people be more violent or be more aggressive than they need to be because they know their identity is concealed.
There's no accountability. Or less accountability. I think this is an important way to frame it too, because we need to get in the shoes of the person who might be being detained and what they're experiencing, right? That's part of what it means to have empathy and to care for our neighbors, to love our neighbors. So do the detainees or even the witnesses have the ability to discern who is making the arrest? I think that's really key, because in our day and age, you can get on Amazon and you can buy whatever equipment you want. You can buy a fake badge. You can throw ice on the back of your jacket. And so I think the detainees and the witnesses need to have the ability to discern, is this a legitimate arrest or am I being kidnapped?
Right.
I mean, that just seems obvious to me, that there should be no doubt about justice is at least attempting to be enacted here, or is this actually criminal activity being done to me? Should agents of the law arrest without a warrant or probable cause? Right, one or the other, right?
Yeah.
Warrants are ideal. Probable cause is often needed when a warrant is not possible. Agents of the law need the ability to act swiftly at times. And so probable cause is a valid reason, as long as the probable cause is actually probable. And so I would just say, for a community to flourish, governing authorities bear some responsibility to communicate about how the law is being upheld. And so for agents of the law to come in and not indicate who they are, who they represent, show a badge, explain either before or after apprehension of what's taking place here. Right. That's just reasonable, right? Because, again, we should have nothing to hide, that we are trying to enact justice on behalf of the government. So to neglect this communication, I would say, is to arouse suspicion at the very least, and to contribute to the public erosion of trust in these authorities. And I think that's what we're seeing.
I agree.
In our community, that there is an erosion of trust because these things aren't happening on a consistent basis. So as I said, this may be after the fact. It might be during the arrest. It might be at the point of detainment. But it needs to happen in a reasonably short duration of time, so that the detainee, the witnesses, the family members, they're not guessing about what took place.
Right.
That's that's inappropriate. That's acting without dignity, not just to the person detained, but also to those who are affected by it. Okay, let's keep moving.
What about detaining people in facilities that don't give full measure of dignity?
Well, yeah, I would hope that would be obvious, but in this day and age, it seems like it's not. Yeah, if they are denied basic human rights, then that's, again, utterly inappropriate. And the very system that is supposed to enact justice is enacting injustice. I'm not trying to make blanket statements. I'm not just trying to say this is what's always happening everywhere. But from best I can tell from the media that I consume, and again, I'm tracking for credible resources, there are at least some cases, if not many, where it's happening in unjust and inappropriate manners, where the basic human rights are being overlooked and neglected. Things like bathroom facilities, things like basic medical care. And so I think for me, as I'm trying to discern what would be appropriate in those kinds of detainee situations, like if I was in charge of that institution where people are going in process to being deported, this is the kind of mental exercise that I would want to do. If you were detained, let's just say you were in a foreign country because you misplaced your passport.
Yep.
How would you expect to be treated while they were sorting it out? Right? That's the kind of mentality I think we should be having about these facilities. That's what these detention centers should look like, because oftentimes we're just making assumptions. We're acting without dignity. We're denying basic human rights because we've already decided kind of these people are not our responsibility anymore, and they shouldn't be here anyway. And that's inappropriate.
We're not treating them like people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I were being detained, I would want to be able to have bathroom facilities and be able to, if I had a wound or needed some kind of medical care, that at least basic first aid would be available to me. Clean water, food, not be freezing cold or in the blistering sun.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. The last nuance of this question is should agents of the law deport without due process? Jeana, can you help us remember what due process is?
Due process means that everyone has the right to a fair trial.
Okay.
They don't, you don't just get thrown in jail because someone said you did something, but you get to go through the process of a trial to determine whether or not criminal activity actually occurred.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you were making a case for why every person, regardless if they're a citizen or on the process to citizenship here in our country, why should even a non-Christian care about due process?
If we don't have due process for everyone, it becomes really easy to deny it to anyone, even to citizens.
Yep.
And so making sure that our country follows the laws that it has set up for itself protects everyone.
Yep. So it's a lack of integrity.
Yeah.
Right. We're not acting the way that we say that we are. We say that we care about justice, but then sometimes we don't live it out. It's also just a very practical way that we demonstrate dignity for people.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the pragmatic components of our legal system that lives out this value.
Yeah. And it lets there be accountability and squashes the temptation to show favoritism or for judges to just make decisions willy-nilly based on their whims. But we're upholding the law that we have established. Yeah. And everyone gets treated with the same type of respect to the law.
Yeah. Yeah, so I put it this way in my notes. To not uphold our own laws is to not be serving as agents of the law. In other words, we're going rogue.
Yeah.
And it's undermining who we are as a nation to not live out our own values. Okay. Question 5. What do we got?
So what should Christian people, do about citizens and those on the path to citizen who have been or are being deported?
Okay, so people who are citizens or are on the path to citizenship but are being deported.
Yep.
Yeah, because we're seeing that in the news, right? That people who maybe their papers weren't checked or they didn't have access to their papers when they were arrested, and they have been or they are being deported, right? We've seen these things in the news. I think in a word, advocate, right? When we allow the due process of law to be overlooked in one area, we open the door to literally the disintegration of our way of life.
Yep.
Right? We are not who we say we are if we're not living out our value for due process and for justice and for dignity for all people. We want the law with checks and balances to win out over any one party and any one administration's agenda, right? That's why we have these systems, not so that certain leaders can override them when they think it's appropriate, but so that it has a measure of pumping the brakes to making sure that we're continuing to live out our values regardless of who's in that chair or around that table making those daily kinds of decisions.
Right. And this issue is not new.
Right.
It might be more in the forefront of our news currently, but under many presidents, there have been immigration issues and there have been detainment camps that were not upholding human dignity.
Right.
And so Christians should have been being a voice for the voiceless every time, regardless of which type of administration is in power at the time.
Yep. So at the same time, we've already kind of hit this, but even as we encourage advocacy for those that are potentially in harm's way here, that can very easily feel overwhelming. And so my counsel to you as a pastor is, for the most part, try to keep it local. Advocate for people you know and for lawful practice in your community first and foremost. So this can be easily overwhelming, right? When we talk about advocacy, because there's all kinds of advocacy needed right now. My counsel to you is, for the most part, try to keep it local. Advocate for people you know, and for lawful practice in your community first and foremost, right? We want to love our neighbor and the people with whom God is bringing into our proximity, and God bringing us into their proximity in our daily life. And so it can be challenging when we see things on the news, and our heart breaks for that. And maybe sometimes God is calling us to write a letter to a government official in Washington, D.C., those kinds of things. So I'm not trying to say that's never the case, but I'm saying that I think for the most part, our primary responsibility is what's going on right around us. So occasionally we might need to advocate on a larger scale, but we're going to throw it back to you and say you need to have some discernment about whether or not God's calling you to get involved at that level. All right, next one.
So what's the big picture?
We've covered a lot.
Yeah.
Covered a lot of territory. Like, if we were to bring this home, what are some of the things that we need to say? From a secular perspective, if the goal is the flourishing of our people, then the surest way to get there is not through treating every foreign entity as an enemy or competitor, but as a neighbor. That being said, truthfully, like, not every neighbor will be safe and trustworthy and contributing to our collective flourishing, right? That's obvious. We all know that. But let's let the evidence speak for itself.
Right. And I think we have to remember that in our country, there is a strong case for immigrants greatly strengthening our economy and our
Sure.
communities.
Absolutely.
And so we can look back on what we've known, immigrants and foreigners to add to the flourishing, and expect that rather than expecting negative things.
So again, we're not suggesting that every undocumented person be granted all the legal rights of citizens. We're not trying to say that every person who's come here illegally and not doing criminal activity, we're not advocating that they should stay. We're saying government has a role there, and that we do want to we want them to provide for the flourishing of our communities. So we're not trying to say every person who's come here illegally should stay, but what we're trying to say is let the government do its job if and when it does it appropriately, and that we as citizens, as people who are from this particular nation, how ought we to live in light of the fact that we're not government agents and that we are representatives of the kingdom of God. And those are two different things. So at the very least, we are saying, though, dignity for every person. If not because we care, at least because that is the kind of people we want to be, people who act honorably and admirably. I'm trying to use language that the secular person would understand and appreciate, right? That even if we're not Christians, we care about acting honorably and admirably. Right. And so if we're going to be those kinds of people, Christian or not, we at least have to lead with dignity. As Christians, we have a much loftier goal, which is
Love. Yeah.
Loving God, loving our neighbor, loving our enemies. Right. And I'm not trying to say that every undocumented person is an enemy by any stretch of the imagination. What I'm trying to say is that there are those people among our country and other native citizens that view the foreigner or the undocumented person as an enemy, and that's not the Christian way of thinking about it at all, right? That these are people that God loves, people of dignity. These are people for whom Christ died, that they might have access to the mercy and grace of God. And are we a roadblock or a stumbling block to experiencing that? Or are we an agent of those things primarily? And so many of these people come to the U.S. with a constant low-grade fear of being caught, right? People that come here illegally, that's kind of always in the background. I mean, I've heard this. I haven't experienced it, but I've heard this from people that I've spoken to, and I don't blame them for feeling that way. I think that's probably appropriate to some degree, that there is some concern there. And what if the people of God could be a community that offers sanctuary to them? Not in the sense of that, we're trying to hide them from government, but in the sense of that we could be a people that love them well, that offer dignity, that are a place where they can feel that they experience community, and that they can grow in their faith, understanding of the gospel, and that they have opportunity to not just hear the gospel, but be in a place emotionally, spiritually, physically, where they can actually hear and receive that gospel, right? And don't forget, we're foreigners and exiles in this world, and that one day these earthly allegiances and citizenships will fully dissolve and give way to the kingdom of God, right? That's where we're headed. People from every nation, tribe, and tongue, right? And on that day, I want to invite you to ask this question. When that day comes, will we be proud of the way that we've treated our brothers and sisters, or look back with shame and guilt for misrepresenting our God and King as modeled for us in the person of Jesus Christ? How will we be on that day? Of course, as disciples of Jesus, we know that our shame and guilt is paid for. But as people who are walking in the footsteps of Jesus today, are we embodying his values? Are we living the way that Jesus lived with the people that were right around him? And when he comes again, will we be able to look him in the eye and say, we have, to the best of our ability, tried to live the Jesus way in the here and now? So I think that's where I want to leave it today. Any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, as Jesus tells his disciples that one day he's going to separate sheep and goats, and he tells them that when you feed the hungry and you clothe the naked and you welcome the foreigner and you visit the prisoner, you're doing that for me.
Yeah.
And so not only living the Jesus way, but serving Jesus by loving our neighbor.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that. That's a good place to stop. Friends, I hope this has been a meaningful conversation for you and giving you some things to chew on. This is only the beginning of the conversation. We really want to invite your comments, your feedback, and to continue this conversation forward online and perhaps in person for those of you that are a part of the GBC family here locally. Until then, we'll sign off and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.